Keep watching The Politics every Friday, 12 p.m.
In a world where the quality of information available to poorer communities is doctored, tainted and sometimes regressive, where the words fake news have come to mean other people's opinions, it is vital to rely on news platforms with journalists who have feet on the ground and can report the truth. New York Parrot, a New York-based national and global news outlet, is changing the narratives of media operations. We focus on the news that matters, like self-empowerment, entrepreneurship, finances, health, security, politics, and more. We strive to curb violence, racial and economic discrimination, and to promote peace and socio-economic development of multiculturally diverse world. As we give voice to the people, we also give your business a voice and make it heard. Get your products and services off the ground by advertising on our fast-growing platform. With so much of daily visits to New York Parrot, you can't afford to be invisible to prospective clients on the website they trust the most. Our posts reach millions of people across the New York State and around the world. Advertising on our news site will unlock an audience of thousands of potential customers on your doorstep. New York Parrot is born to prosperously speak tomorrow for the voiceless.
Hello, welcome to the Foreign Policy Review. I'm Dustin Pickering, your host, and we have Carlo Parcelli and Billy Bob with us today as co-host. Today's special guest is Dr. Vladimir Goldstein, and we're glad to have him. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Dr. Goldstein? We'd love to hear about you.
Yeah, hi, everybody. I was born in Moscow and immigrated from there in '79. It was, of course, like a different countries, Soviet Union, with a fair amount of sort of oppression, restrictions, and I didn't like that much. I always wanted to study literature and history and culture, but it was not that difficult to get into this university. So I ended up studying mathematics and computers and hating it. So I was very happy when I had a chance to immigrate. Since then, I got my PhD at Yale in Russian literature and been teaching in various places. Oberlin College, Yale University, Brown University, focusing on literature, culture, politics recently, giving sort of writing articles, giving interviews on the subject. So everything concerning this part of Eastern Slavic lands, culture, politics is within my interests.
Well, thanks for your introduction, and we're going to talk about the Russian referendum today. So does Carlo or Billy Bob, do you guys have any questions for Vladimir today?
Yeah, I would definitely like to jump in and just thank Professor Goldstein. He's got some great credentials, as he just told us, and I thought he would be a really interesting guest to discuss, the recent events in the Ukraine. But we're just honored that you've agreed to come on our show and talk about this with us. Thank you very much. You probably have a lot of thoughts. Every day there's all these new things happening in Ukraine. You had the counteroffensive recently, and now we see some countermeasures yesterday, some countermeasures from Russia, a partial mobilization, a very partial mobilization. And tomorrow, I think, is the day that they're going to have a referendum. And I'm not sure if that referendum is going to be in all of the territories, but essentially, we could see that those territories are going to actually be considered part of Russia. But I don't want to talk too much. I want to kind of turn it over to you, Vladimir, and have you, contextualize things and just present it in the way that makes the most sense to you and what you think it means. So if you don't mind just going on that. And before we do that, Carlo, did you want to add anything or
No, I'm anxious to hear Dr. Goldstein.
Okay, so of course there is a war and, offenses, counteroffenses, strikes. These are all complicated and concrete issues. But what I would like to focus on and highlight is that Ukraine is a rather divided country. And what we've seen in Ukraine since 2014 at least is some kind of a form of a civil war. And that is very essential for people to understand, because the rulers, the regime in Kiev denies it. What they say when the east of Ukraine doesn't want to obey Kiev, they start blaming Russia. Russians, they always say Russian separatists, pro-Russian separatists. It's basically they're not separatists. This is like, Ukraine is a very complicated conglomeration. Just think about the United States of the last century when we have a civil war. This is South, this is North. They have issues. They fight. They don't agree with it. It doesn't mean that South was British or French separatist, or North or some kind of separatist. It's a country which is kind of divided. And so Ukraine is a very, it's a relatively recent country, and it was patched together by all kind of, territories. Some people are very pro-Polish, some are kind of pro-Western, some are part of Austro-Hungarian Empire. They didn't know the Soviet Union, they didn't know Russia. Other sides are very pro-Russian, they speak Russian. So when it wasn't clearly when Ukraine actually came into existence in the 90s with the collapse of the Soviet Union, that was a very complicated proposition to run this country. They tried to be kind of balanced. They would have the rulers. Some would be like, one ruler will be from pro-Western, another one will come from this Donbass Eastern era, and trying, it's more or less, again, think about, say, maybe Canada with French and English speakers trying to kind of balance. So that's what they do. What began to happen, unfortunately, in 2014 with this kind of Maidan revolution, is this western part of Ukraine began to assert its dominance and its rule on the east, saying, forget about Russian language, forget about the culture. We have to move to the west. We have to join NATO. We have to do this. And people, in the east, from Kharkov area, sort of all the way to Donetsk, they were not quite happy about it. And the more Kiev pressed, the more angry they would get. So eventually we have this kind of fighting, which was galvanized by Russia's taking Crimea. It's put where you stand vis-a-vis that. And East would say that fine, we actually want to join Russia as well. To which West would say, West of Ukraine, oh, this is awful, they grab our land, we have to fight. So this is the reality, and this reality confirmed by a lot of Western polls, when people would question their opinions before 2014, before this rough measures of banning the language, banning TV, treating Russians as second rate. A lot of people in the East said, we're functioning in Ukraine. It's not the richest country, but we're kind of finding their way. Once these measures began to introduce, poll after poll, we don't want to live under Kiev. So Kiev doesn't want to let them go because they got upset or were already losing Crimea. So for 8 years, since 2014, they were shelling the East. They were shelling and they were shelling and they were sort of attacking and killing. And we're talking about at least 12,000 killed. We're talking about a billion of people displaced. Some of them went to Russia. Some of them went to to Ukraine. And living here in the West, I meet all kinds of Ukrainians. Some Ukrainians who sort of come from one side, some on the other side, and I see how diverse and different they are, how different their values, how different their readings of the situation. So the east of Ukraine, since 2014, they formed these republics which refused to give in. They were held by Russians for sure. There's Donetsk and Lugansk republics, and they were pleading with Russians, take us, we want to be part of Russia. To which Putin was probably afraid of this outcry, which he experiences now, and he was like dragging his feet. So there was endless amount of questions, do something for us, because we're being killed, we're being shell. So eventually, that was one of the reasons that Russia went there, with the soldiers, besides this NATO encroachment, is somehow to do something about this festering wound in Donbass and Lugansk. So that's kind of the background. Now, Russia has more or less like Lugansk is practically under Russian sort of control. Donetsk is mostly, plus Russian soldiers in this other neighborhood regions, Kherson and Zaporozhye, which is also predominantly, and I've been in these places, I've been in Zaporozhye and so on, it's industrial base, a lot of Russians, and I would say 75% of them will be more than happy to join Russia. So what will happen when we have this referendum is that people would vote for two reasons. Why? One, they are kind of Russian speakers, pro-Russian, they identify with Russia. B, they actually want the stupid war and stupid shelling stopped. They just want to stop, because nobody wants to send their kids to wait on the bus stop and when the bomb goes. So they definitely would vote for Russia sort of to join in. And then Russia kind of figured out, people say that Putin is a good chess player. So this is first move. And the second move, once they vote to join in, and once we sort of say we accept them, we need to have enough army, enough soldiers to protect them from the fate which was befalling on Donetsk since 2014, from shelling, from this. And that's why he said, once we declare them Russian territory, you better stop this shelling, because we have plenty of ways to kind of increase our fighting. So that will be the result. What is more interesting about that is that, say, as I mentioned, we're talking about 4 republics, four regions: Lugansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporozhye. So Lugansk is practically 100% geographically, as this region was 100% under Russians. Donetsk is a little bit less. The same thing applies to the Kherson is probably, there's the other side of Dnieper is still, in Ukraine. Their leaders already declared that if the referendum holds, if our region say we join Russia, that applies to the whole geographical region. So in other words, the part which is now kind of under Ukrainian soldiers, but geographically it's a part of, say, Kherson region, it will be Russian. So in other words, once they declare that Russians will say we have to liberate our land for sure. We have to fight there. So that will be definitely bone of contention, because it's easy to do it within Lugansk, which is all under Russian control and pro-Russian. What they're going to do in Zaporozhye region, it'll be a little bit more difficult, but I'm sure they will send military. So that's why Putin realizes to get this job done, at least that type of a job, he needs beef up human personnel, because they definitely have enough rockets and whatever, but they need people.
So this referendum is tomorrow, right?
I think it'll be. They gave 3 or 4 days. Maybe they will do it in different districts or regions in different days. But I think they should be done by 27 or something. They probably to try to tie it up to the weekend. So that's what they will want to do.
So all 4 regions within the next few days are going to have this referendum.
Yeah.
So what about the territory, that is not under Russian control? That's going to make it, it's going to give the West, the West's soft power apparatus, the ability to, to diminish this referendum and to treat it as if it's, just a dictatorial land grab, instead of, a democratic thing. How can Russia kind of explain, if for instance, you said that Kherson wasn't totally under not 100% under Russian control. So there's people in Kherson. How are they going to participate in the referendum? If they're under Ukraine, Ukraine's not going to let them participate.
Yeah, I think, that's what sort of the district leaders say, if majority of our district votes for Russia, then that we'll join it. So of course the parts under Ukraine, first of all, they wouldn't be allowed. Second of all, they'll be scared to death to express their opinion, because Ukrainians are very harsh. They always blame Russians for being harsh, but Ukrainians, once they suspect you of being collaborator, they beat you up, torture. The very famous case of they publish the names and addresses of anyone who dares to criticize, from children to the leader of Pink Floyd. Anyone is on this list. So maybe we say it's not legal, but Russians can turn it around and say, Ukrainians don't allow people to vote, because otherwise we know how they vote. The Ukrainians scared them to death, so we cannot take the West for their word. But Russians are probably getting very, very angry, and that's another interesting development. Somebody who studies the culture, who is from this culture, who come into Russia, I see it more and more that Russians turning away from the West. That this is a very kind of very powerful Russian cultural trait, starting from the Peter the Great, that we have to learn from the West. We have to turn, embrace the West. We have to do it. So this tide, which Peter the Great started, seems to be reaching like a very low point, and Russians are willing to turn away. So they basically now, for a while, it was, yes, the West is a place of the laws and the rules and democracy and this, and now they say, wait a minute, what about Kosovo? You grabbed a piece of land and had some kind of whatever, you decided that it's not part of Serbia. What about grabbing 1/3 of Syria? What about, leading all this mayhem all over the place? And you guys going to tell us about something? Look about England. They have one incompetent leader, Boris Johnson, then replaced by absolute doomwit leader who really obnoxious. Even, this Liz Truss, even commenting on the exchange when Russia gave in this British soldier, she said, "Thank you for Zelensky, and you, Putin, are going to rot in hell," or something. Wow. At least they thank you for organizing. So Liz Truss exchanges, comes to as a leader of the country by the vote of 20,000 people. Whom do they represent? This is like what? The ruler of England is decided by 20,000 Tories, and then they're going to tell Russia it's not democratic. I mean, so that's a Russian attitude, and I think it's sinking more and more in. Of course, there is a fair amount of liberal, Western-educated kids whose parents are probably wealthy in Moscow and Petersburg. They send them to England. They say this, so they come back and they are very much pro-England, pro-Europe oriented. But majority of Russians, kind of see that, understand it, and are frankly very much kind of shocked by the very strange Western kind of pro-Ukrainian sort of involvement. So I don't think Russians are ready to poo-poo a Western criticism and say, well, what else do you want us to expect from you? You've been Russophobic, you were promoting Russophobic positions for decades. So what else is new?
I have a couple of questions. The first one has to do with the counteroffensive in Kharkiv, and whether or not that had any determining factor, was a determining factor in Putin's latest move for the referendums. And the other is it speakers like Scott Ritter have talked about how Ukraine has ceased to exist, and other people have said this too. But now it's simply a kind of NATO tool, and this is rather supported by some rhetoric coming out of Poland that well, if they're going to have these referendums in Ukraine on Russian behalf, they would like to have a referendum on Galicia and places like that. And I'll just leave it there. What do you think about those two areas of?
Well, let's start with the second one because it's easier. I mean, there is definitely a fair amount of countries, from Romania to Poland to sort of Russia to other places which have territorial claims on Czechoslovakia, which have territorial claims on Ukraine. They might sort of flex their muscle like Lviv is traditionally Polish city and so on. But I don't think it will be so disruptive for EU to start doing this. So I don't think they will proceed with it. So I think Ukraine will continue in one shape or another. So I don't, Russians will probably, part of it will join it. There are certain big questions concerning southern Russia, Odessa, all this access to Black Sea. That's a very kind of pro-Russian territory, but recently been, of course, enforced by Ukraine because they need this access to Black Sea. So I don't know about that territory, but I think Ukraine will sort of exist. In terms of counteroffensive, this is very important, and I would say there is like what we witness is something like that. I suspect that Putin was, kind of when he started this campaign, he thought that there would be some kind of negotiations right away. And originally, Zelensky was talking about it. Said, I called Vladimir and I said, let's sit down like man on man, and talk about it. Then, he discovered a different track. I go around the West. They give me a lot of weapons. They give me a lot of money. I refuse. The more I refuse to sit at negotiating tables, the more I will get from that. And the West gets involved. And we now have the whole kind of machinery of the West involved in this war. Like billions of dollars are going there. So that's what they want. For some reason, the West, with Biden and others, the Europeans, they say we can't afford to lose to Russia. And that's offensive, which they took, is a sign that the West is very serious. To which, Putin finally realized, actually, we can't afford to lose to the West. Because for us, it's absolutely existential. For the West, it's like maybe a matter of prestige, matter of some kind of, standing. But for us, if we lose there, it basically means collapse of Putin, collapse of the country, and so on. So Russians indeed can. And for Russians, it's existential. So just, and they would increase and increase and increase until they go to nuclear war. That's what he says. This is, for me, I'm not backing off. You guys, what do you care about Ukraine? You're going to lose your billions of dollars. But it's basically, if Ukraine, whatever happens to Ukraine, life in Baltimore, in Sacramento, where will continue. If we lose in Ukraine, life in Petersburg, life in Moscow, life in Kazan wouldn't be the same. It'll be totally destroyed. The whole country might sort of explode in a revolution. The whole country might split up. So we're going to preserve it. We're going to fight it, and whatever it takes. We start slow. What Putin showed. We get army, but if we need it, they're going to be full mobilization. There are going to be rockets. There are going to be a couple of cities will be wiped out until we get our message across. And eventually, the West will back off. Because for Russians, as I said, it's existential. Let's think about sort of Israel, for example. They claim that the threat to them is existential. And we can do anything. The minute we feel that Iran threatening us, Israeli says, we're going to nuke them. So that's why, because we are a small piece of land, we have to defend. That's their defense. So Russia feels the same way. They're not a small piece of land, but they feel that this is existential, and we will take care of this existential problem for us. So it's somebody can say that it's also existential for Ukraine. Well, yes, if it's existential, then sit down and discuss and give up on the territory of people of which do not want to live under Kiev. There is plenty of territory. They love, the Western Ukraine, Kiev region. They found their way through this kind of negotiating, working, sending their young kids or young women to work in Germany in whatever capacity. They found their way. Fine. Nobody pretends on them. They can live. They can live there. So it's not exact. But if Russia feels that it's existential threat to them, they will make it existential threat definitely for Ukraine. And then where we are at the nuclear war. So sooner or later, I think Putin knows that the West will back off because it's not their fight, while it is a Russian fight. And I think that's the bottom line, which I think Western leaders fail to comprehend. Let me give you one little example. When the whole thing with Crimea started, I wrote an article in Anti-War, and I just bring the example from this film, Sundance. What is it? Sundance Kid. With what's the first full name?
Butch Cassidy?
Yeah, Butch Cassidy and Sunday Kid. And there is like a great moment when our two heroes, Newman and the other guy, so they pursued and they make this absolutely mad jump down sort of the ravine from like a very, very high mountain. And they sort of landed fine. And then, one of them asked another, why do you think that we jump? And why do you think that these other guys wouldn't jump, wouldn't chase us? And said, well, we're jumping for our lives. Like other guys, what do they care? So in other words, these two were running for their lives. They need to do that. They jump. They make a risky jump. They jump. People who are pursuing them think, do I really need to break my neck or leg to get these two outlaws? No, let them do. So Russian view of the whole thing is precisely like that. We need it is existential. Crimea is absolutely part of it. We have a Black Sea fleet there. We have Sevastopol for which people. This is a part of our kind of identity. We're going to jump as high a mountain it is. We're jumping, and the West eventually will look down and say, we're not chasing you down there, and that will be the end of it.
Well, I'm not sorry, but all the way back into to perestroika, U.S. policymakers, some of them still in positions of power now, like Robert Kaplan, they were part of the Project for a New American Century, and this this is just anecdotal out of there because there were many policy papers that basically said now we have the opportunity to balkanize Russia, and that's what we have to look out for. And scholars like Mearsheimer have said, look, this is the opportunity. Ukraine has always been the prime target for the West to use as a wedge to blow up the Russian Federation and to splinter it into a bunch of smaller republics and to weaken it, and a part of the plan is to weaken Europe too, which is doing quite well. It's that Europe is just walking right into that maw, that U.S. maw, destroying itself. So I think that you're right, absolutely, about the existential nature of Russia, but I think we can't underestimate the venality of the U.S. I think that the U.S. will carry on. I mean, they've got a proxy now who's sacrificing thousands and thousands of their young men to this useless endeavor. Every time there's been an effort to negotiate, Bojo the Clown, Boris Johnson, with the CIA and U.S. officials behind him, prompting him, have ruined, have just told Zelensky no negotiations. And so I really wouldn't put it past the U.S. to be going all the way. For the U.S., money is existence, power is existence. NSA 68, Kennan's remarks, George Kennan's remarks about on a unipolar world, and all the other people down to Pompeo, that fat pig. Well, actually, he's lost some weight now, but I'm not quite so sure they would back down.
Mearsheimer's made that point too, Carlo, right? Mearsheimer said,
yes.
The stakes for both is beyond their capability to back off. Neither side can really back away, and that's his concern. He's articulated that.
Just briefly to add that, yeah, right. And with China in the picture and the threat of the unipolar world that the United States planned on after World War II, and assiduously drew the roadmap for, they don't want to lose that, and for them that's existential, I guess I want to say. So I don't know if you want to elaborate further on that.
We're going to take a brief break, but we'll be right back. I invite our viewers to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching the Foreign Policy Review. We'll be right back. America Open Market. AO Market. The best digital market for humanity is a free, multilingual, borderless market open to international sellers with various languages included. With America Open Market, you may start selling in minutes after filling out the form. Comprehensive dashboard where you understand your sales, orders, and customers is available. You get paid directly, securely, and instantly on the America Open Market. You can sell your house, car, electronic laptop, CD player, boombox, phone, headphones, furniture, and clothing, and anything on AmericaOpenMarket.com where all your sales and customer needs are met. Register as a merchant today. You will not regret becoming a vendor at America Open Market. For further inquiries, contact us at aomarket@gmail.com. AO Market, best digital marketplace for humanity. Do you know that there is a publishing company that wants to make life easier for you as a writer? This publishing company is called World Inkers Printing and Publishing. We publish in all different languages, and we're looking for writers of all genres, all formats. We're looking for scholars, ghostwriters, playwrights, poets, short fiction, novelists, you name it. We're looking for anybody who is interested in writing and the craft of writing to be in touch with us. You can reach us at info.worldinkers@gmail.com. With World Inkers Printing and Publishing, you do not require a lot of money to publish with us. Contact us today at info.worldinkers@gmail.com. Become a winner with other authors at World Inkers Printing and Publishing. Give us a shot. We will surely finish you. Welcome back to the Foreign Policy Review. I'm Dustin Pickering. We're with Billy Bob, CARLO Parcelli, and special guest Vladimir Goldstein. And if you're not subscribed to our channel, please subscribe. We're talking about the Russian referendum today. So do we want to continue along the lines of inquiry that CARLO introduced?
Yes, Carlo, first of all, this is like a $6 billion question or whatever. This is very important comment because it goes to the heart of, current situation and the heart of sort of where Russia stands and where United States stands. So let me take, two parts to the approach to that. First, in terms of United States. Sure enough, this is existential in terms of, this post Soviet Union collapse. The United States enjoyed a tremendous opportunity at that moment. Russia is no longer a threat. China is still sort of in its breeches. And we dominate the world, and whatever we say goes, and we like to keep it this way. Sure enough, I understand it. If you do nothing and people run around and bring you food and bring this, you as a spoiled child say, yeah, I want more. But eventually they say, no, you have to pay. So, and we see that United States is just simply overextended. They cannot deal with Russia and China and India and all this. So sooner or later, some smart people, not Biden, obviously, but and not Hillary stooges who run State Department like, this Jake Sullivan or Blinken or others. Some sane people will come over and say, we cannot take the whole world. We just better live in multi sort of polar world. So furthermore, even just imagine, they are kind of beginning to succeed. They're pushing Russia. Russia is feeling weak. Then, what do you think China will do? China knows that they will be next. If United States succeeds here, they will be next. So to bring back again this Pax Americana, and China will do all it can because for the time being, China is doing very well. So the Russia is fighting. China gets a good kind of a price on oil and natural resources, which Russia has in abundance. But if Russia collapses, that means West and America gets all the resources. China gets nothing. So for them, it also will become existential. So in other words, we have so many kind of players there. So sooner or later, United States will realize they just cannot win. In terms of Russia, that's another different story. We know, that's kind of my forte. You study how Russians, they always viewed as backward by Napoleon. Well, they started a whole war, a patriotic war. They beat the hell Napoleon, who invaded with plenty of other countries, Italians, Poles. There were like 20 different languages invaded. Germans did the same thing. They had all these things. And Russia, which was like, experienced the revolution, experienced and devastated, civil war. They were pushed back to nothing. So within 10, 15 years, they turned into this very powerful military machine. So if Russians push to shove, they can they mobilize better than anyone, and they can actually deal with harshness better than anyone. So, okay, let's talk about what, people talk about General Winter. So when we have Russians actually can dig their heels and can live in their huts. Neither Germans, nor the French, nor Americans will be living in tremendously cold weather. If to heat up your heating system, you have to pay like $2,000, and then they say, because we're sending billions of dollars to Ukraine, the countries like in Western Hemisphere, they will start protesting. Well, I hear that people in Germany are ready to protest, and Germans want to send the soldier, and so on. So if it comes down to kind of tighten the belt, I don't think anybody can outdo Russia. So I think yes, it's existential for fat cats sitting in Washington like these Kagans, but we have elections here, and eventually all over. Eventually, people will vote these warmongers out and say, "Listen, guys, this is way too expensive. You said you're saving us some money. Where are the savings are? The money goes to Ukraine. We're paying through the nose for gas and this and that, and these guys will be voted out." So that's, maybe I'm by nature optimist. Maybe I became optimist after I immigrated to this country. I don't know, but I see that sooner or later people will come to their senses there.
Well, let me ask you this. This is an explosive question for this panel. What do you think? It might sound absurd, but what do you think if the MAGA people, the Trump people, came back into power? Would that change the dynamic between Russia and the U.S.?
It's an interesting question. I really don't know, because Trump was pretty erratic. He keeps on saying, that he wouldn't have started the war. He would have talked about something different. But, I think there will be some kind of improvement. For starters, I think Trump, he probably likes to have deals. So he would probably sit down with some kind of, with Russia, with Ukraine, whatever, make some kind of a deal out of which people will get something. Of course, we do know during his kind of reign, there was, he had to deal with all this establishment. So every step which he tried to do, from Pompeo to others, they would sort of kind of undermine it, including his own party. I think Democrats are definitely much more warmongering versus Russia, but Republicans are, they're not like, there's, we have on Fox News Tucker Carlson, who says something kind of sane and thinks, why don't we think about the United States first and then go on this adventure. But a lot of Republicans are equally interventionist. And, so I think there will be probably slight improvement, and Trump will probably push for negotiations, and Trump will probably push for something, but then he will do something probably equally outrageous in some other department. And I don't know whether it will take us. So from what I read, Russians actually did some kind of, their think tank did some estimation, and they concluded that it wouldn't be a great improvement no matter who come to power. But maybe if, for example, Republicans win in these midterm elections on the fact that we don't have enough money and there is inflation and money goes somewhere, they would probably have to tinker a bit, and they will tone down the financial aid to Ukraine, and that will actually translate in Ukraine, or Kievan leaders more willing to negotiate. The same thing applies probably to England as well, because they cannot commit endless amount of money while the people are suffering from unemployment, from heating bills, from gas bills. So that's I think that's what probably should give us some hope.
It seems to me that Trump kind of had a different approach to the whole thing, and not necessarily Trump, because Trump, I don't think, is really a policy maker, but definitely the capitalist factions that supported him kind of, resulted in Trumpian rhetoric saying, let's be friends with Russia. And essentially, I think they were smart enough to see that they don't want Russia and China together and joined at the hip. And so it's like, he had, there was an establishment consensus that was definitely going to subvert Russia and destroy Russia and then turn itself to China, right? That was the establishment consensus. And then Trump was backed by these capitalists who were thinking, well, how about we just try and get Russia on our side against China? What's wrong with that? And that was a no-go for the consensus, and that was what Trump was trying to put through. And we saw how the media really tore him apart for that. They had big murals of him and Putin French kissing. So, but, I totally agree with your analysis, Vladimir, that, you might have a slight improvement. You might have Ukraine, more willing to negotiate if Trump, returns in 2024. That's definitely a probability. I would agree with that for sure.
I would, I think what you say is correct, and I think there is probably some sane businessmen who probably thought that definitely a threat to us as businessmen comes from China, and Russia has a great market. We can sell them stuff, we can buy things from them. So why should we sort of have such a better relationship with Russia? It didn't happen. But what you mentioned consensus. I want to go back to Carlo's point about Ukraine as a wedge in Europe. That is, we have another force which probably Americans were considering their policymakers. There is China, there is America, and there is like very powerful market EU. And technically, Russia is still there in Europe. And if you imagine this, giant thing, if it's a giant block, China is here, but EU together with Russia, if it's together, that's going to be very, very powerful thing and very competitive things. If you take German kind of know-how with Russian resources, and then they can sort of outproduce, outsell, outdo American products easily. So I think that's where consensus wanted to do, just to put a wedge between Germany and Russia and create Ukraine. And actually, in that department, they succeeded tremendously. The Germans, out of the blue, which were like, for a while, they were somewhat sympathetic due to the reasons of their neighbors, tremendous business opportunities, this and that. Now Germans are very much anti-Russian. So, the establishment succeeded there. And EU as a proposition gets weaker. US and that level sort of probably benefits. They hope to sell them some, liquefied gas and oil and this and that. So, they're not totally stupid, So they in terms of midterm and kind of short term, they're probably good. But in the long term, I think the whole thing is going to backfire.
But that brings up the question, like Nord Stream 2. You're absolutely right. Nord Stream 2 is shut down, and why would the Germans work so hard to destroy their own economy for obviously for the benefit of the United States? Essentially, I can't get a grasp on that. Why Europe in general is willing to sacrifice itself on the altar of Wall Street? I'm mystified.
From what I understand, there are like a complicated two answers. Is that one, I guess since the Second World War, German elite in Germany sort of they have certain amount of guilt over the war and certain amount of, say, maybe if you want to call it Stockholm syndrome. Americans kind of and Russians won, so they obey their leaders, and Russia is like withdrawn. Russia used to have part of Eastern Germany, if you remember. Now they withdraw. Now just basically American dominates, and with this, America more or less took Germany, its elites, its cultural, basically hostages, and these guys follow what America tells them, even if it's detrimental. Theoretically, there should be a top leader who, like in manner of, say, De Gaulle and France, who would say to Americans, "Wait a minute. We're making a tremendous business here. We're doing, we're using Russian gas. We're like workshop of Europe. We're workshop of the world. We're producing, cars and all equipment. Go to any hospital. Siemens, this, all the stuff the Germans are doing. They're superb with it. But you need a leader who would sort of stand up to America and say, "No, we're doing fine, thank you." But they don't have that, and they somehow, through this post-war period, the elites got totally indoctrinated in American ways, and following their kind of dictate, and thinking that this is normal, cool, essential for us to follow American. Common people are not happy, but many of them feel that they don't have the voice. So those who have voice, they sometimes articulate it in by embracing some kind of right-wing, politicians, which are also not succeeding. But another thing is, many Germans to tell me, is that they still have American bases there. So we're still, some of them say, by the way, we're occupied country. We still have sort of American armies here. So they're definitely not ready to challenge that. I remember there was a very interesting moment when Merkel, their chancellor, discovered that CIA had access to her private phones. Can you imagine, Putin had access to Lee Strasbourg? It'll be like they'd be screaming, "Let's start the war." And what the Germans said, "Okay, fine."
Yeah, and go back to De Gaulle, the CIA tried to assassinate him at least 2 times. So there is that element. If Macron doesn't have the spine for it, he's got good reason not to have the spine for it.
I mean, there was an attempt, and when I visited Sweden, they had a very independent leader who didn't want Sweden to act here, act there, was against a Vietnam War. He got killed. They never
Olaf Palme, yeah.
Yeah, but people believe that there's definitely CIA. So in other words, there is a record of police.
Yeah. Oh, yes. A long record.
Who say we have our national interest, and they take priority over American interest.
Carlo, let me try and answer your question. I think there's 2 frameworks. There's 2 conceptual frameworks. There's the liberal conceptual framework that just sees nation states and tries to understand things in terms of democracy. And they try and understand, why would Germany do this to itself? And I don't think you can understand it if you utilize that liberal paradigm. I think you have to go back to a Marxian analysis. You have to go back to oppositional class interests. And you have to understand that you have a capitalist class that's international. It's a global capitalist class. They don't think along the lines of, what's good for this country. They think what's good for our class. And that's the only way to really understand why Western Europe is allowing itself, because the people that are making these decisions are the capitalists. They're the ones with the money.
Yeah, but they're cutting their own throat.
No, they're not cutting their own throat. They're cutting the throats of the working class, and they don't care about the working
class. They're cutting their own throats.
No.
I mean, German industry is about to collapse. German industry is about to collapse.
Okay, so within the capitalist class in Germany, you have a division. You have different factions. You have the financial elites who are happy to see the industrialists go down, and they don't care. And that's the reality of it, because it's the financial class that has the power in both the United States and in Western Europe. So there's a division within the capitalist class between the industrialists and the financial elite. There's a great article on that. I should link to it. But that's the way to understand it, because there's no other explanation other than you have a group of wealthy elites who are not going to take any pain whatsoever. They're making decisions in their own benefit, and they understand that the people sacrificing is the working class. Same with the oligarchs in Ukraine right now. They're pushing these policies because they're not sacrificing. It's the working class that's dying, and their global overall interests are being furthered. They hope, but again, their plans are failing. Their plans are totally failing because Russia is still economically powerful. They thought Russia would, be collapsing more than they are, and so Russia is definitely doing good, and their plans are not bearing fruit. But the only way you can understand how Europe has agreed to sacrifice itself is through the lens of class war and class struggle and oppositional class interest, in my opinion.
Dr. Goldstein.
Yeah, if I can add something, I would say kind of it's a funny answer, but I think both of you are right. But I would definitely draw the distinction between financial elite you refer and industrialist. And I think what happens, and Germany is a very interesting case, like say, they still have very powerful industrial elite, and this industrial elite have to sort of take a stand, but they don't. Because we have a very powerful, like say in England, I don't think they have many industrialists. We basically have financial elite and kind of this the media, and this is like a deadly combination between financial elite and media. And basically, England is totally kind of globalist. Basically, industrialists are not globalists. They understand that the business is local. To do this, to produce our cars, I need good cheap source of energy. I need metals. I need this. So these guys run. Basically, they do have a conflict with financial global elite because they are more local, but because they have also financial elite, have the media, have public opinion, then I imagine it's very difficult if you're head of Volkswagen. It's very difficult for you to go against politicians, against financial, and against media. And then because what will happen, you'll be immediately called Putin's stooge or something. And there was a very interesting case happened in the United States. I think it was a very serious warning to this industrial elites. If you remember, at certain moment, Americans discovered something in Volkswagen, that Volkswagen cars are producing some kind of pollution. And they slapped them with $1 billion fine and another $1 billion fine. They found it. I mean, and basically that was a blow or like indication. If you guys want to take independence, you want to lose American market in terms of the cars. And here our industrialists, fold their arms and say, okay, we're following financial elite. Because America is still very powerful market for industrial products. So this is a very complicated relation. So in other words, I'm not kind of arguing with you, but I'm suggesting some kind of fine tuning.
Let's look at China too. So China, you have a whole bunch of Western corporations, U.S. corporations that just want to make money. They don't care about the capitalist class. They don't care about, U.S. hegemony over the planet. They just want to make a buck. They want to make money in China. The United States government, the capitalists, the elite, the people that decide policy are looking for a way to force a decoupling from China. They're looking for an excuse to tell U.S. businesses, you have to get out of China. So they found that excuse in Russia. They forced all the U.S. businesses out of Russia, but there wasn't very many U.S. businesses in Russia. So they're looking to provoke a response from China that will allow the U.S. government to force U.S. businesses out of China, because U.S. businesses don't want out of China. They're not class conscious. They don't care about the capitalist class, but the people in power, the financial elites, they understand class power. They understand what a rising China and a rising Russia are an existential threat to the ruling U.S. hegemony, and they understand that they have to pull U.S. economic interests, detangle it from China, and so they're looking for. They're trying to provoke a response from China that can justify legislation to force an economic decoupling. So, and again, this is class struggle. You can't understand this through the liberal paradigm of nation states and what's in the national interest. The national interests are always divided between the working class and the capitalist class. And sure, there's capitalists that don't know their own interests, that don't think on a class basis. They just care about making a buck. But the people in power see things through the lens of class struggle and through the lens of what's best to maintain our capitalist class hegemony throughout the planet. So that's my big thing. I get excited about it. You can tell.
Yeah, but the world needs this.
What's this?
The world needs an object produced for there to be a financial class at all, as well as the people that make this, the industrial class. Now, to divide those two together is absurd, because you don't have one without the other. So if you have a world with no objects being created, no Volkswagens, no pencils, and you just have a financial class, you don't have anything. You have nothing.
No, that's true. That's not in the interest of the financial class.
It's not in the interest of human beings.
Yeah.
That's absurd argument. Divide those two.
Wait, what?
I think, the paradox is, where I would agree with Billy Bob in terms of, say, Marxist approaches, like, one of the ideas is this powers of market are such that eventually they push countries into some kind of a corner, and they begin to dig their market, getting market share, getting this, getting that. They begin to dig their own graves, and they like this example of like, okay, we decouple from China, and then we decouple from Russia, and then something happened, and then we decouple, and then what we're going to sell burgers to each other in this land, and how this class is going to make money. So in other words, there is a real contradiction in terms. To make money, you have to be global, but at the same time, if you start threatening countries with withdrawing from their markets, the Russians, for example, again, talking about Russia, I don't know details about China, but EU, American companies went away from Russia. So there is a lot of Chinese companies, there are a lot of Turkish companies. Again, it's business, it's capitalism, but this capitalism is actually beginning to destroy itself. That's kind of the idea. So when it's unbridled, when it just goes sort of to the extremes, it has its forces. Shakespeare has this from Troilus and Cressida, that appetite, when it just pushes further and further, it eventually eats up itself. And I think that's what Americans might end up doing if they push this. This economy, fine, you want to do it, but then it has to be real business, real trade, real whatever. But if they start playing kind of dictatorial games, it's going to be kind of the end of it. So in other words, either you're a capitalist or you're a socialist, but I think Americans are trying to be kind of both on that level. Introducing politics somewhere, capitalism somewhere, and it might end very bad there. Yeah, I don't know. I hope I make myself.
Yeah, in Marxist theory, he talks about the contradictions and social relations and how you're supposed to perfect, in order to have a truly communist society, you have to perfect the relations between labor and capital, which I think is a lot of these contradictions that Billy Bob and Vladimir are talking about that Carlo objected to is, it's not rational, the division between financial elites and industrial elites, but it's a factual contradiction within the class workings that we see, the dynamics. That's just my opinion. That's just how I've read Marx.
I agree with you.
Absolutely. I think we're on to something. I think we're catching on a little bit. I don't know. What do you say in defense of your comments, Carlo?
What? I'll just repeat what I said. If you don't have something to sell, you don't have finance. Right. You have fiat currency.
That's why we have so many inequalities and confusion within the system. I mean, it's part of the dynamic. I mean,
I don't want to have the last word. I'd rather hear from.
What I did at the very beginning of 2014, when there was like kind of rebellion, and I call it civil war in Donbass. I wrote an article on Al Jazeera. They published it then. Like I call it Marx's Last Stand. So I viewed the actually people, workers in Donbass. One of the reasons, and we didn't talk about it during the show, that I said that they are, pro-Russian. They are not happy with the, kind of banning of Russian language, but they are workers. They work on the mines. They work on sort of industrial, because this is a very industrial part of Ukraine. So what they sensed, if the global West comes over, they'll be all closed. You let this Annalena Baerbock from Germany, she would close all the mines. It will be all kind of, like some kind of financial market, designy things, some kind of nonsense. So these guys, the workers, will lose their jobs. And that's another reason they begin to fight. They say, we want to preserve our jobs, we want to preserve our giant metallurgical factories. That's what we want to do, because they might be, according to global sort of prescriptions, they might be closed. So they will fight it. So Ukraine is actually also kind of one of the places where we not only see like Russian, Ukrainian or or West versus kind of, Russia. But also we see some economic forces there, because, the workers' interests, they have to be either recognized or they have to be given an opportunity to have interest in work. Otherwise, what will happen? Factories will be closed. You are useless. You want to go to Germany and work cleaning their toilets? Fine. That's the future for the working class. And many people in the industrial people, maybe in the Western Ukraine, these peasants who didn't know anything, they might think it's a good future. I'm going to Poland or Germany and I work there in the hospital. But for these workers who have a respect for themselves, who have good, decent salaries, to know that they've been closed, that's why they probably lean to the other side, anti-West.
But somebody has to make the toilet.
Well, thank you for joining us, Professor, and Billy Bob and Carlo. Thank you for your commentary and questions. This has been the Foreign Policy Review, and I'm Dustin Pickering. If you have not subscribed to the channel, to Parrot TV, please do so right now, and keep watching Foreign Policy Review and take a look at some of our previous programs. We've had Scott Ritter and a number of interesting guests, so please just give a good view to some of our previous programs and watch some of the other Parrot TV programs when they come on. So thanks for joining us today, everybody. Have an excellent day, and do some reading, guys, out there watching today.
In a world where the quality of information available to poorer communities is doctored, tainted, and sometimes regressive, where the words fake news have come to mean other people's opinions, it is vital to rely on news platforms with journalists who have feet on the ground and can report the truth. New York Parrot, a New York-based national and global news outlet, is changing the narratives of media operations. We focus on the news that matters, like self-empowerment, entrepreneurship, finances, health, security, politics, and more. We strive to curb violence, racial and economic discrimination, and to promote peace and socio-economic development of multiculturally diverse world. As we give voice to the people, we also give your business a voice and make it heard. Get your product and services off the ground by advertising on our fast-growing platform. With so much of daily visits to New York Parrot, you can't afford to be invisible to prospective clients on the websites they trust the most. Our posts reach millions of people across the New York State and around the world. Advertising on our new site will unlock an audience of thousands of potential customers on your doorstep. New York Parrot is born to prosperously speak tomorrow for the voiceless.